Hello again, everybody. I'm Andre Polo, Academic Advisor at the School of Social Work. Welcome to our ASWB Licensure Exam Workshop. Like I said, this evening we'll be talking about the social work licensure process in Michigan, and we'll also be discussing the exam. So a quick but comprehensive overview of the Michigan licensure process. So, like I said earlier in the presentation, we're not going to be able to cover everything in in-depth in-depth process that some folks might need or will need. Sorry, go 1 second. Can somebody spotlight me if possible, please? Yeah, I can do. Okay, there we go. Excuse me. So as I was saying, this is considered a great place to start to really get into the depths of the exam and the technical processes and all of the things you need to know. I strongly recommend that you take a look at this video that is on the NASW of Michigan's website. Dwayne Brejek, the president, did an awesome job. Again, hour 46-minute walkthrough in a little more detail. And they also have some other good videos on their YouTube channel, and also we have some good videos on our Wayne State School of Social Work YouTube channel. So I will send out all of the materials that we use in our Step Into Your Future sessions, but just for some further information. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about licensure in many different angles. I think the best place to start is a timeline, kind of walking through you as a student, how you transition from being a graduate or an undergraduate student to applicant and to a full licensure. Maybe a good time now to say that our licensure process is normally pursued or is pursued. We talk about it mostly as being a master's thing, the LMSW, but some social workers choose to get licensed with their BSW, LBSW. So anywhere that it may just say LMSW, please understand that this information is relevant and parallel to the BSW licensure process and exam. Would like to spend some time going over some of the stakeholders, people you'll be working with during your licensure process, and also want to talk about the exam, like I said earlier. Excuse me for my possible disjointed presentation this evening. Maybe it's been a long day, but thanks for being here. So the Michigan licensure process begins when you graduate with your MSW, BSW program degree, which I'm sure many of you are. And if you're from the community currently working, this is something you've already accomplished, congratulations. And you want to make sure that that's a certified degree. So you know that your program has stated to us that you have finished an MSW program, and you're telling the state you have that credential. So once you're finished with that degree, and you can do this right away. I mean, you can do this, once you have that certified degree, you can go ahead and immediately apply for your limited license, which is the credential that you'll work with when you work towards building towards that full LMSW licensure. So as soon as you get that application, you get it approved, go ahead, put it in that email signature, right? You earned that. So you apply for your LL. The state recently, required now 2 years full-time work, 4,000 work hours. There used to be an option on when you could take the exam, but we feel this is beneficial because not only does it give students a built-in time to study, but it also gives them that work experience so that they can start to build those professional skill sets that they're getting licensed for. So you graduate, you apply for your limited license. While you have that limited license, you work 2 years, study for the exam under the supervision of another licensed master social worker. And then you take and at some point pass the ASWB licensure exam after completing those 4,000 hours. 4,000 hours is about 2 years full-time. If you're working part-time, it would obviously be more. So like I said, that LLMSW is where you'll start. The applying for the LLMSW is a little simpler than applying for the LMSW. You apply to LARA, which is the licensing body of the state of Michigan. They need to receive your official transcripts, again, certifying that you have a completed degree from an accredited university. And also for documentation reasons, you need to provide them fingerprints. So that LL, that limited license that you take, is good for renewal up to 6 years. So you have 2 years to complete the 4,000 work hours, and then you have another 4 years to take the exam. And obviously everybody's situation is different, whether or not they renew each year. But while you're working towards the exam and working those 2 years certified, you want to make sure you're renewing that limited license every year. And I'll be sure to pause for questions at the end of the, before we conclude tonight's presentation. So then, once you pass the exam, you got that full LMSW. And, we as social workers in our code of ethics state what they're lifelong learners. So there are also continuing education requirements and things outside, required professional development that that full LMSW folks have to complete as well. So, the process doesn't stop there. It's thankfully the only exam you have to take. We're happy about that, right? So to achieve that full LMSW, again, you complete those 2 years full time, you successfully pass the ASWB exam. So there are 2 types of license in Michigan. There is the clinical practice, the LMSW clinical practice license, which a majority of our students will probably go on to, that they're doing clinical practice, working with individuals in interpersonal settings. I mean, you're all familiar with that. But then there's the macro license, the advanced generalist license. And it really just depends on your scope of work, what you're doing, what you want to do. But very important to keep in mind is those hours, just like your degree, have to be certified with the state by an LMSW. So not only do you need somebody to be able to continuously provide you supervision like you do with your field instructor, but you also need to have somebody that is also registered, completed this whole process to report that to certify your hours with the state. So something that our writing and career coach, Miss Vanessa, talked about in yesterday's session, which we'll have available for access for folks after this week, is when you're negotiating for your position, be sure to, make sure that you have somebody that can either provide you subsidized or, built-in supervision. That's a key sticking point for social work jobs. So, little key piece of, practical career advice as you go into the job market, be sure you're looking for that LMSW. Some places might not have it on staff. So just very quickly, before we get to the exam, we've been talking about the technical processes, how you're sending things to the state. Quite literally, you will go into a portal and log hours with the state of Michigan. There are several, everything in social work is an acronym. There are several organizations and bodies that we want to make sure that you're familiar with. So obviously there's LARA, who is the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. MI Plus is the online portal that you'll actually use to submit your hours. So MI Plus, you create an account and have that be a designated place for you to report. The ASWB, obviously, is the Association of Social Work Boards. They're the ones that actually create and administer the exam. Let's be clear on that. The NASW does not administer the exam. They advocate and support social workers, and they do a lot of education. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the NASW, but they themselves do not administer the exam. That's the ASWB. And then finally, all of this is done under the supervision of the Council on Social Work Education, the CSWE. And they're the ones that kind of bridge the gap between education and licensure process. They set the educational standards and the competencies that social workers have to fulfill. So if you're in these classes and you've been obviously reading your syllabus and understanding the code of ethics and the competencies embedded into that, all of that is dictated by the CSWE to make sure that that's being covered and in conjuncture with the exam. So let me just pause for a second, and as we transition to prepare for the exam, you want to just remember that what works for one social worker does not always work for another. We can sit here and give you guidance, and there's a lot of concrete resources that we can draw your attention to in terms of how to prepare, study, how to mechanically go in and review the material. But then at the end of the day, what works for somebody else and how they got to their path of full licensure and practice exam might not work for you. So there's a certain level of self-reflection here. Just like we all work in school, we develop our own workflow habits. It's about thinking about what works best for you. So, a lot of times with the ASWB exam, folks want to go to study groups, which are awesome and definitely help with accountability and motivation and scheduling. So if that's how you learn, I definitely recommend that. But again, just do your research, consider multiple things, and don't be afraid to go through that self-reflection process to really make sure you know how you're going to get across that finish line. So just some concrete resources to draw your attention to, and kind of going along the theme of study groups, you definitely, even if you're not studying with them, use your peers. I'm sure you have a great cohort of social workers that you're graduating with right now. So reference, see what they're doing, tap on some shoulders, and maybe that's a good place to start. What are you using? What's your process? What's your journey, your path forward? So some very popular places to start, which I'm sure some of my colleagues or other social workers you might talk to would reference, are the Therapist Development Center. That one's pretty popular, and Pass It Pro. Now, again, these are paid services that, classes you take. So you want to also consider your resources. So there's some other things you can use if you want to go a little more, kind of self-starter. There's free content guides. There's, free resources on the internet you can Google that just kind of provide basic information and outline and practice stuff. We'll do some practice questions in a minute here. The School of Social Work has resources available. We just finished a Lunch and Learn series. So you'll just want to, do your homework and find out what's free before you spend a ton of money, right? Something that Dwayne from the NASW pointed out in his presentation that I linked back over to on YouTube earlier is that you want to study. When you're studying, you want to study maybe 1 to 2 hours a day, short blocks, and no more than 3 to 4 days a week. Again, all of this is contextual to you individually, but we don't want you to burn yourself out on this stuff. At the end of the day, the reason that we have licensure process with the state is to ensure ethical practice and supervision, but it's also to just make sure that social workers are doing their thing and continuing to learn. So part of this isn't just to make sure that you're taking this exam, but also to use the exam as a tool to better understand our practice and how it's applied in the real world. And again, we have resources at the School of Social. We have a mentoring program that we're developing and continuing. It's been in place, but I think it's being retooled. But if that's something you're interested in, kind of getting a licensure mentor, definitely feel free to reach out to your advisor and ask them about that. So the exam is 170 multiple choice questions. Only 150 of them count. They throw in a couple questions in there as test questions. They use the past data for those, kind of to see how folks reacted and use that data to formulate the test for next year. You go to an actual test site. There's test sites located all over the state, but when you go in to schedule your exam, they will actually give you a physical location to go in. There are 2 types of questions. So this is maybe a little bit important for that, that actual exam prep stuff. This is some stuff that you might talk about in the Therapist Development Center or another course one might take. There are 2 types of questions. There are those direct questions, those recall questions on core content, kind of, it or you don't, what is the best drug to treat bipolar? So that's where that content review, some of those courses, they're going to cover the juncture on what clinical knowledge you need to know. And so, that might be things like practice models, family, development models. I'm sure Eric Erickson is going to be on there. DM, I'm sorry, diagnostic material, things of that such. And then there's also those case vignettes, and we'll see some of those in a second. And those are kind of using the plan change process and key theoretical models to apply to practice situations. So I know I said earlier that the exam kind of helps us apply concepts to the real world, but part of that is because it's based on a generalist perspective. You don't take the exam based on what you actually would do in the real world. It helps you apply theory. So when you're looking at these exams, what you do in your real life might not be reflected or accurate in the exam question. That's not the perspective you're looking for. What you're looking for is, what would the average social worker across the United States do according to the knowledge and ethics of our profession? And a lot of times it comes down to looking for those key words, best, first. That all kind of harkens back to the generalist perspective of the plan change process. And again, what do social workers do? In what order do we do them? And how do we bring in knowledge from different areas of our undergraduate and graduate training to inform those answers? So we're not looking for what does Andre do or what does, Jeffrey do, but it's what does the average theoretical social worker do? So some general exam tips, things to think about and start working on, because the exam is testing you on two folds. It's testing you on those case vignettes, those direct questions, social work knowledge, but it's also testing you on your ability to work under pressure and take a multiple choice test. And I feel like that's something that social work students get a little tripped up on. It's not even just how well do you know your stuff, but how can you manage the stress and natural anxiety that comes in with being put under that pressure? That's something we also deal with every day, is working in stressful situations. So there's kind of an element of just knowing how to manage test anxiety and how to take a standardized exam. It's not something that folks might do all the time. So I know that we're also trying to work that into our classes. And so, our hope is that you might have had at least one multiple choice exam, if not done some test questions in your courses. So anyways, back to kind of exam tips. When you're looking at an exam question, which we're going to do in a second year or so, I might have folks pause and take a look at what's in front of you, and we'll see if we can apply that in just a minute when we practice together. Part of this being a workshop is we're all learning in this together. So we'll go ahead and we'll give it our best shot. But when you have a question you don't know the answer to, come back to it. You can go through and flip through the questions to your ease, kind of like you did in high school. You can come back to something, so circle it, come back to it. Not as a all the time, but as a kind of place to start rule. The most specific answer is usually the correct one. The one that's kind of sticking out with you, and seems like the best place to start may or may not usually be the correct one. Something that's really important that they'll stress during, different exam prep resources is don't assume information. Sometimes students make an inference based on previous practice experiences or, how they're interpreting the question. You can only go on the data that you are given. So just like when you're working with a client, you can only assess what they're giving you. You cannot assume that anything else is going on except for what it is directly asking you. Here's the situation in front of you. What do you do first? Those are the parameters you work in with. So again, it's kind of knowing that order of operations. So this is where those concepts, those generalist concepts and those applied concepts come in handy. And that's why those course guidelines that you'll see, those content guides, excuse me, what is actually on the exam, A, B, C, D, a little bit of this and that, CBT, those kinds of things. You want to think about what is the place you start, right? look for the stem of the question, as they might call. Sometimes questions you might see in your mind, you could kind of bold things. So those best words, first, best, and then the who, what, when, where, why. Sometimes it might be even locating who is the subject of the question. Are we treating the dad? Are we treating mom? And if they're interplaying together, who is the primary subject that the question relates to? Again, first, best, least, most. You'll get comfortable with applying those words and that language to the experience of taking the exam. So let's take the exam, or at least one exam question. I will go ahead and read the question. I then would just love if folks want to put your answer in the chat. That might be best. If some folks want to come off mute or put your video on and let us know what your answer is. This is a safe space, so really none of them are, nobody's answer is invalid. One is just correct. So I welcome everybody to participate here, and we'll just see how we do. All of this is in the name of learning, so we'll just give it our best shot here, folks. So a hospital social worker meets with an elderly woman after nurses express concerns about possible elder abuse. The woman resides with her grandson and was recently admitted for pneumonia, but nurses have discovered several bruises on her arms and legs. When the social worker goes to talk to the woman, her grandson and several other family members are present. The social worker wants to interview the woman today, as she may be discharged soon. What should the social worker do? A, provide the woman with a business card and ask her to call if she needs anything. B, ask if the woman would like to talk to her alone. C, interview the woman with her family present. Or D, ask the family to leave and interview the woman by herself. So I'm seeing some answers in the chat. I'll give folks another minute to go ahead and read the question. Again, look for the stem of the question, the most important keywords in the setup: who, what, when, where, why. That might be a good place to start. And then what are those keywords? A lot of these are question, answer, cause, effect. What is the causal relationship? So I'm seeing B, I'm seeing D. Okay, B and D. So the answer is D. Ask the family to leave and interview the woman by herself. And I think the key idea here is, what would the average social worker do? Some of these could be relevant in a practice situation, but according to the model, we have suspected abuse. So that right there escalates things. And we have a certain motivation to act, right? So in this situation, you want to go ahead and ask the family to leave and interview the woman by herself. Let me just pause for 2 seconds again. And let me just, does anybody have any questions about why that might be the right answer, or maybe the logic behind the question?
All right, what if we chose B? Wouldn't that kind of it wouldn't protect her privacy, because if we asked her, would you like to talk would you like to talk alone in front of her family, then that would be still leave her in a vulnerable situation to possibly be intimidated or forced to say yes or no.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence Robinson. Thank you. Yes, that is, I think, exactly it. So asking the family to leave would be the optimal situation in there. And again, I think somebody in the chat said I was thinking about HIPAA. That's exactly the same kind of theme there. So this is going to be a little bit of a different question. A clinician is working with a 7-year-old who has been sexually abused by his father. The father is now in prison. The child's mother reports that the child often hits her and screams, "I hate you." What ego defense mechanism is the child most likely using? Again, most likely. Repression, displacement, projection, or sublimation. Sublimination, excuse me. I'll be honest, I haven't looked at this question specifically. I was going over more the presentation this morning. I am not 100% confident in my answer here. So we're doing this together, everybody. So I'm seeing C, B, C. Okay, the answer is B, displacement. The child is displacing his feelings towards his father onto his mother. And this is one of those examples of those recall questions. So you had to know ego defense mechanism to be able to answer this question. So that goes kind of back to what exam you're taking, what license you're applying for, would also inform some of the content that's on this exam. So I think we have one more. If folks want to try it one, try one more. Here we go. A social worker shopping at a grocery store sees that the cashier is a former client. How should the social worker respond? A, the social worker should go to a different checkout lane. B, the social worker should greet the client just as she would anyone else. C, the social worker should ask the client if she feels comfortable checking out her groceries. Or D, the social worker can talk to the former client to see how she's doing. Okay. Seems a little more consensus on this one. B. Yes, exactly. This is a sort of an ethics question. You know, what is one's ethical responsibility to have professional boundaries with clients, right? And I think the differentiation here between some of the answers is A, go to a different checkout lane. That's the right idea. But if you're not, if you're doing that, that then signals to the client, just like Mr. Robinson was describing the last question, that puts the client in a compromising position because why are you going to a different checkout lane? That acknowledges some sort of bias, right? So the answer would be B, the social worker should greet the client just as she would anyone else, establishing that boundary of, in our sessions, I am your social worker. In real life, I are normal, outside of the office, I am just another citizen, a stranger. So that is kind of that ethics question, that applied concepts. Should we go for one more? I think so. We'll go ahead. Are folks still with me here? Thank you. Thumbs up. Thank you, everybody. So, which of the following assumptions is not accepted by a social worker engaged in family treatment? A, each person strives for a sense of relatedness and closeness with others. B, treating the scapegoated family member will help the rest of the family. C, family members explain their own sense of worth on the basis of the behavior of others. Or D, Family boundaries are the means for individuals to protect differences and maintain identity. So, which of the following assumptions is not accepted by a social worker engaged in family treatment? Looking for the stem of the question, which of the following assumptions, looking for those keywords, is not accepted? So if you, another kind of tip, read the question. I know that might seem kind of elementary, but you know, I myself am very guilty of just plowing through, skimming, reading, you know. This is one of those situations where you need to maintain diligence, read the whole question. All right. We have some knowledgeable social workers. You can tell everybody's getting ready to take the exam. Yes. The answer is B. The scapegoated family member will help the rest of the family. That is not an assumption accepted by a social worker engaged in family treatment. All right. We really want to be testing you today, because that's what we're here to do. Let me just we'll do questions in a second. That's okay. So last one, I believe. A man brings his 16-year-old son to a therapy appointment to have him assessed for depression. His son has started wearing black and has dyed his blonde hair black. The boy denies he's depressed and says that all of his friends dress the way he does. According to Erik Erikson's stage of psychosocial development, which crisis is the client experiencing? A, industry versus inferiority. B, intimacy versus isolation. C, identity versus role confusion. Or D, autonomy versus shame and doubt. So maybe a little Easter egg I had earlier bringing up Erik Erikson. This is a great example of direct recall. There's clues, I'm sure, but the best way to answer this question is to be able to recall the knowledge of Erik Erikson's stages of development, which is covered in accredited social work education. Everybody learns Erik Erikson. If you're here tonight, there's a strong chance that you have covered Erik Erikson at some point. And I'm correct because it looks like, excuse me. Oh, well, apologies, folks. The slide is mislabeled, but the correct answer is yes. C, identity versus role confusion. Identity versus role confusion. Yes, that is the correct answer. Somebody in the chat said, you scared me. Yeah, my apologies, folks. Again, working too fast. Gotta read the question, read the answer, read the slides. So that is a wrap for tonight's presentation, just in the sense of that is kind of a quick and dirty rundown of the process. I hope that going over some exam tips and tricks was helpful in doing some practice questions. It looks like folks did pretty well on tonight's pop quiz. So I think that's a really good indicator that some of this might be already percolating in your brain as you transition into your career. So I will send these slides next week. I haven't once I have everybody's email, which we'll get in just a second. But if you're graduating, best of luck on your licensure journey. We, as the social work department, the School of Social Work, are proud of our graduates. We know that you got this, and if you're, just kind of starting the journey or you're in between programs, it's never too early to think about licensure. I think Dr. Najir Durak talks about that in orientation. It's never too early to start thinking about your next step, especially as you're interviewing for jobs and looking at that supervision element. So thank you for your time and attention. Yes, go right ahead.